Good afternoon, all my friends. I'm extremely sorry we are running a bit late. Actually, we were supposed to start this webinar at 4:30, but because of some technical difficulties, we were not able to start at 4:30. Now we are working this with the help co-host, and therefore the controls are with a friend of mine who is a co-host and is not with me right now. So I request all of you to kindly mute your phone. Bharat Prabhu, the rest of you, all the participants, I am requesting you to kindly mute your phones. Otherwise, there will be difficulty to listen to this program. First of all, I thank Honorable Abhay Thipse sir for agreeing to address the webinar. It has been a great privilege for all of us because the lawyers who are coming from very remote places, it is very difficult for those lawyers coming from these remote places to even get access to such great luminaries like Abhay Thipse sir. I had an occasion to appear for Honorable Thipse sir when he was sitting in division bench with Honorable Marlapalle in the matter of Nando's murder case, when the matter was before him for confirmation. The confirmation matter as well as the appeal, both were before him for hearing. And I had an opportunity for good almost 1 month and more than that. The matter continued before the bench. Recently, when we had a function at Nasik of all the lawyers, incidentally, I met Honorable Abhay Thipse sir, and there itself, I had requested that someday we'll request you to come to our place. Because of the lockdown, we could not call him here, but then he has literally honored us by agreeing to be a part of this webinar. I request my friend Advocate Bharat Prabhu to kindly introduce our today's lecture, who in fact needs no introduction, but as and by way of introduction, I request Advocate Bharat Prabhu to kindly introduce our guest lecturer. Bharat, over to you.
Yes. Good afternoon, friends. Today, hello, Sangram.
Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Today, we have a very special Sunday. As today, we have the honor and privilege to have with us on the eminent solver and luminary jurist in the realm of law, none other than Honorable Abhay Thipse sir, who is a former judge of the Bombay and Allahabad. Having started his career as an advocate in 1979, Thipse sir practiced in various civil and criminal courts at Mumbai. In 1987, he joined the judicial service of the state of Maharashtra. In 2007, he was appointed as the principal district and sessions judge of the Gadgaon district. In 2011, he was elevated to the Bombay High Court as an additional judge. And in 2016, he was transferred to the Allahabad High Court. During his career, he presided over several high-profile cases, including the Vadodara Best Bakery case, which was a case transferred from Gujarat to Mumbai. And of course, the famous Sohrabuddin encounter case. I must mention at this juncture that Justice Abhay Chipse sir was adorning the division bench of the Bombay High Court with Justice Pillai, who together heard the confirmation proceeding in the famous case from our Sindhudurga district, namely the Nandos multi-murder case, wherein our host and our dynamic leader, Advocate Sangram Desai, was arguing as the defense counsel. Justice Abhay Chipse sir is known for his outstanding and updated knowledge of the legal position on various subjects, and also for its extremely straightforward and absolutely clear notions in the field of legal profession and judicial service. Justice Chipse sir has always been very kind, sympathetic, and inspirational to all junior lawyers. We all are eager to listen to him on the topic of dying declaration and memorandum recovery Panchanama under section 32 and 27 respectively of the Indian Evidence Act 1872. Welcome, sir, and over to you, Sangram.
Thank you very much, Bharat. Now I request Honorable Abhay Chipse sir to kindly start with today's webinar. Over to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And a very good evening to all the participants, the others who are present here. Now, let me first start by saying that the person who selected these topics himself must be an expert. It is because these are the two topics, that is dying declarations and section 27, which are probably the most used in criminal cases. If you open any book or commentary on Indian Evidence Act, you will find that the maximum pages in the book are devoted to these two sections. If you compare them with any other sections, you will find more case law, more elections, more discussion with these two topics. In fact, there is no dearth of judgments. And even though some of you or most of you must be coming from remote areas, nowadays because of internet, all the judgments, a large number of reported judgments are available. But the point which I want to make is that I have realized, unfortunately, while working at various levels as a judge, even in the magistrate court or in sessions court and later in the high court, and ultimately in some other state, where of course little different circumstances were there in that state than what we experience here. So in all these cases, I find that though the case law is available, it is doubtful as to whether the advocates, or if at all they follow, how many of them follow the principles behind these two important provisions. In fact, sadly, I must say, I have at times seen from the judgments of the lower courts, which used to come up before me in appeal or revision, that the court has missed the essence of these provisions. So we must first understand the provisions. There was one judge in the Bombay High Court, and when I was in a district court, he was addressing a gathering of some judges, There he mentioned that whenever I have to deal with a case relating to a particular provision of law, I always open the book and read the section first. He says, even if I have read it earlier, I definitely read it at that time. Indeed, he was right, because you have to first grasp the statute as it is. And it is only in aid of that, in interpreting, you need the aid, then you can refer to the case law. There is something like textbook. Unfortunately, in India, we have limited textbooks. If you see in UK, comparatively, you will find more textbooks. I mean textbooks in the sense that they try to teach you subject. What is the subject? But here, basically, I find that even juniors, they learn on the basis of case law alone. Of course, case law is useful, but its function is done. First, you have to understand what the provision is. Otherwise, you will never follow the case law. At times, the case law is not designed to explain the basic things to the reader. So therefore, we must start with the basic provisions, and my endeavor will be to discuss some points so that you are enlightened as to why these legal provisions, what they exactly lay down. And in relation to that, you will understand the case law better. Now let us start with dying declaration. Now the first point which I would like to make here is that though the word dying declaration is commonly used, it is not used in the Evidence Act. It is nowhere mentioned in the Evidence Act. Dying declaration would mean that a declaration made by a person who is dying, who is anticipating death. This term has been borrowed from English law. But what we term as dying declaration in our system of law is not the same what is meant by dying declaration under the English law. See, under the English law, a declaration given by a person who is expecting imminent death is termed as dying declaration, and it is relevant or admissible only in criminal proceedings where the cause of the death of the person comes in question. As far as our law is concerned, dying declaration is covered by the provisions of section 32(1) of the Evidence Act, which speaks of statements made by the person who is dead when it relates to the cause of his death or any of the circumstances of the transaction which resulted in his death. Now, as I said, though all of you must have read this section repeatedly, it would be necessary to read the section before we begin a serious discussion into that. So section 32, first of all, it doesn't deal only with dying declaration. The section is cases in which statement of relevant fact by person who is dead or cannot be found, etc. is relevant. Now I will read the section. Statements, verbal, written or verbal, of relevant facts. Every phrase is important. Made by a person who is dead or who cannot be found or has become incapable of giving evidence, or whose attendance cannot be procured without an amount of delay or expense, which under the circumstances of the case appears to the court unreasonable, are themselves relevant facts in the following cases. Now, this is the general provision in that section, which doesn't deal only with the declaration. And now comes the clause 1 or subsection 1, which we popularly term as dying declaration. I will read that also. When the statement is made by a person as to the cause of his death or as to any of the circumstances of the transaction which resulted in his death. Now, in which cases? In cases in which the cause of death of that person comes into question. Now it is clarified, and this is what I told you, the difference between Indian law and English law. Such statements are relevant whether the person who made them was or was not at the time when they were made under expectation of death, and whatever may be the nature of the proceedings in which the cause of its death comes into question. So two things become clear, that a person, when he makes the statement, need not be under anticipation of death, and secondly, this dying declaration or this statement under section 32(1) will be admissible even in civil proceedings. Of course, the cause of the declarant's death must be in question, The relevancy depends on that. With this introduction, we will go deeper. Now you will see, this is much wider than what is a purely dying declaration. Of course, the statements made by persons who are anticipating death, who are facing imminent death, they will also be covered by this section only. But this section is much broader, where even when the person is not anticipating death or is not on deathbed and he makes a statement which is relevant under these provisions, they would also be admissible. So this is broader than dying declaration. Of course, declaration is also covered in this. Now, there is a difference between cause of death, the phrase that is cause of death, and circumstances of the transaction resulting in death. The discussion on that we'll do at some later point, but that will be little complex discussion, little difficult to understand also. Basically, I will say that the second phrase, that the circumstances of the transaction resulting in his death, tries to give a wider exposure, wider scope for the admission of this statement. And of course, that when such broad interpretations are being done, the questions are decided by the court from case to case basis, and you may not find a uniform view in all the matters, because slight change in the facts will change the view of the court. And the difficulty is that we tend to interpret all the words in a judgment as if they are words of statute. It is well settled that the judgments are not to be understood or read in that sense, because when the statute says whosoever does, the statute really means whosoever. But in the judgment, whosoever may not mean anybody, because the terms used in the judgment are qualified and conditioned by the facts of the case. So they apply to a particular category of cases to which the reference is made. Anyway, this is a broader discussion about how to read judgments. But since we have to deal with some law, I thought it proper to mention that one must know how to read a judgment and how to understand what is laid down actually. Now, the problems which come before you as lawyers and before the judges also is how to evaluate the dying declaration. We have come to know what is a dying declaration. And the most commonly, I believe, they appear in the cases of these dowry deaths or bride burning cases, as we may call them, because there after the death, allegations are leveled against husband and in-laws. And then such cases, I have always found that there are some dying declarations, at least oral dying declarations, or sometimes they are reduced to writing. So these dying declarations one has often to face. As an advocate defending an accused, you will be faced with the task of fighting with this dying declaration evidence. Now let us see what is the evidentiary value of a dying declaration. We'll decide that, we'll discuss that, but I would make a reference to the most important case on this point, that is Khushal Rao versus State of Bombay, AIR 1958, page 22. This is a judgment delivered by 3 judges of the Supreme Court, 3-judge bench, because previously the judges many times used to sit in as 3 judges in 3 judges bench. Nowadays, because of the pressure of work, generally we don't see 3-judge benches. So this judgment, is an exhaustive code on the value or evaluation of dying declaration. Again, I would like to tell the members of the bar, particularly the young lawyers, to give attention to the older judgments. See, every point of law were initially authoritatively decided in some cases. And these cases, you will find a more exhaustive definition, exhaustive discussion, and a more exhaustive consideration of the relevant provisions. Subsequent decisions, while reproducing from those, little departure sometimes we find it is made, and then based on that departure there may follow a further departure. I have seen not only the lawyers, but judges and sometimes judges of the higher court, unfortunately, I may say, to be laboring under an impression that a recent decision is to be preferred over the old one, but their position is the contrary. It is because the older decision lays down a law, and unless it is overruled, it continues to be law. In fact, if a recent decision has been given in ignorance of the older decision, that judgment will be per incuriam. You have to prefer the older judgment. And since we are dealing with topic of precedents, I will not go deeper, but you can make a reference to Sandeep Bafna's case, where unequivocally the Supreme Court has said that if two different views of the Supreme Court taken in two different cases are cited before the High Court should go with the older judgment. Unless, of course, the older judgment is specifically overruled. The overruling is not possible unless you refer to it, disagree with it, and this is also done by a branch of a greater strength. Means earlier judgment is of 3 judges, and this should be overruled by a judgment of 4 judges or 5 judges, that way. So this is something important which one should know. Now, therefore, you study. My advice is that after this webinar also you study the judgment of Kushal Rao very clearly. What is important to know is how and why that decision was given. See, their lordships of the Supreme Court were dealing with a judgment which had come to them by way of appeal, where it was mentioned that it is now well settled that a dying declaration by itself is not sufficient to convict a person. And it was stated in that, well, it is now settled law, settled legal position that it is by itself not sufficient. While dealing with that, their lordships made certain observations, and the conclusion is that it is like any other piece of evidence, and it is neither higher nor lower than any other piece of evidence. Unfortunately, what happens is this: I find many times arguments are advanced, and even the courts have held that dying declaration is supposed to be something special, a more reliable sort of evidence. That is not so. And I will explain why certain sentences in some judgments, they mention about the sanctity of dying declaration, about unlikelihood of a man meeting his maker with a lie in his mouth, as they say. I will discuss that. But before that, one must know what is the position of the dying declaration evidence. You all know what are the fundamental rules of evidence. The fundamental rules of evidence are that evidence must in all cases be direct. That best evidence, such as the nature of the case would permit, must be given in all cases. If you have 2 types of evidence for proving a fact, and you give the type of evidence which is second rate, then that itself may be a ground for disbelieving that evidence. Because the best evidence, why are you not giving? That is the question. If best evidence is not available, it's different, because Evidence Law Act doesn't say that only a particular way you must prove a fact. But the best evidence rule is so fundamental that it is well accepted. I mean, primary evidence, secondary evidence, in case of documents also, it is a part of that only. Best evidence should be given. We require oral evidence to be direct. In other words, it is the person who has perceived the facts which he is going to narrate. He must come before and he must depose. The definition of evidence is the statements made before the court by a witness, and not pre-trial statement. Not what is said before the trial commenced, not what is said to somebody else. But all these factors are not available in case of a dying declaration. Another principle is that the evidence must be taken on the face of the accused and not in front of his accused, in his presence, and not behind his back. Law actually cannot contemplate a situation where somebody is heard behind his back and is condemned. Now just see what happens in dying declaration. It flouts all these rules. It flouts all these principles. And in one of our judgments, when I was in the Bombay High Court, we have held, the division bench of which I was a member, we have held that it's a violent exception to all the rules of evidence. Again, cross-examination is supposed to be a vital part of the attempt to discover truth. A person comes and says, narrates a tale. Now, to judge the reliability of that version, cross-examination is held to be a powerful engine. The laws to the extent of saying that if cross-examination has been denied, that evidence given in the chief examination is valueless, worthless. It cannot be even taken into consideration if the opportunity to cross-examine was denied. So this cross-examination is also denied in case of dying declaration. Let us understand, therefore, the character of a dying declaration. See, a witness, we'll call him A. A witness comes before the court and he says that B may be the victim, deceased. B told him that C assaulted him. Him means B. Now see the problem. It is not the question. Suppose what B told A is the only point involved, then it will be direct evidence because A has heard it himself. But we don't introduce dying declarations for that purpose. We want to prove the fact that B assaulted C. Now, if C is not dead, if C would not be dead, A will not be saying that. At the most, it will be heard, he will be heard only as corroborating. But B will have to come and state before the court that C assaulted him. So this first exception means first serious inroad on the rules of evidence is this, that you determine the correctness of a statement which is not made by the witness himself, and the witness owes no responsibility to him. Now, how to cross-examine also? Because A only say, I don't know. B said this. You ask any question, he will say, I don't know. B said this. So he is not taking the responsibility of what B said is true. That he doesn't take and he can't take also. He simply says that B told me. Now, in such a situation where there is no opportunity to cross-examine. Hello. Yeah, am I audible? Are people here able to hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
No, there is some...
We can hear you.
Yeah, so shall I continue? No?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes. So now what happens? Then why do you admit such evidence which you otherwise would not admit? The reason is, one reason is on the ground expediency. I find some disturbance because I can hear some noise of maybe of some participants, or I don't know, but I hear that there is no problem in hearing, no? Means everybody is able to hear. I am very audible.
Yes, sir.
Yes, okay. So one is the question of expediency. Sometimes there may be no other evidence except what the declarant of the statement, that is the deceased, said. Then sometimes it may be that only deceased knows the facts, and therefore if that evidence is shut out, there will be miscarriage of justice. The third consideration is that we believe that when a man is dying, he will not speak likelihood because he will not speak lies. There is less likelihood of his telling lies. He is likely to speak truth. That is what we tend to, that is an accepted belief. How far that belief is correct and whether that can be taken as absolute truth, that also needs to be discussed. But usually it is believed that when you have now lost any hope of survival, you will not resort to falsehoods. They say that a man will not beat his maker with a lie in his mouth. Therefore, there is a sanctity attached to a declaration given by a person who is anticipating death. And it is at that time the question of sanctity comes. Now, this sanctity to the statement of a deceased is not emphasized in the judgments of the court to put it at a higher level than other evidence. Means one can't say that evidence of dying declaration is more reliable than the evidence of an eyewitness who is challenged, who is tested by cross-examination, and who is consistent in his dealing. it is not over and above that. Sanctity, one has to say, to bring it on par, because otherwise it has got no value in the law of evidence. To bring it on par with other evidence, that this emphasis on sanctity is there. But I find that even advocates wrongly suffer this notion and do not properly argue before the court when the court says that no, the dying man will not lie. That's not the question. The question is whether that sanctity takes the dying declaration on par with the other evidence, or whether it takes it at a higher level. It is not correct, as some people assume, that it is something which is higher level. In fact, it only brings, in spite of its weaknesses, it brings it on par with other evidence which may or may not be believed. Then I would like to discuss from practical point of view what you may be facing and all that, because unfortunately in many judgments, and sometimes in judgments of higher judiciary also, we don't find any discussion on how to decide the reliability of a dying declaration. You will find at least 1,000 judgments in which it is said that a dying declaration, if reliable, can be safely accepted. Now that hardly helps you or the judge or the prosecutor, because this is not a statement which is peculiar to dying declarations. Even the witness, evidence of punch witness, if reliable, can be accepted. So the origin of these statements you see in the older judgments, because they were taking a view that this strictly being not evidence in the sense in which it is given in section 3 of the Evidence Act, it cannot be acted upon by itself. It can be used only as a corroborative evidence and not evidence on the basis of which conviction be made. So to counter that, it has been said that a dying declaration has a special sanctity and it is on par with any other evidence. The factors which you see in the judgments, sometimes unfortunately they are wrongly reproduced, because this will apply to a person who is anticipating death. But that is not the requirement of law. Sometimes the statements are such that the maker, the declarant, is not under expectation of death. And if that time, like a parrot, if you say that a person will not make a false statement, then it has got no meaning. So there are judgments and judgments, situations and situations, observations and observations. But why I want to focus this, and I want to utilize this opportunity to let you think of the basics. Then no judgment will pose any difficulty for you in understanding and in arguing if it is not consistent with the principles laid down. So the dying declaration, how to evaluate, you don't find. So I will say that there are judgments. Some of the Bombay High Court, I am referring to them because I was a member of that. It is not that in other judgments it is not there. There are many judgments of the Supreme Court also. But unfortunately, many of the judgments don't try to explain the basic things which are sometimes forgotten. Now, how to say that a dying declaration is reliable? What will be the steps? Now, first you must understand that what should be the first thing to be proved? That a declaration was in fact made. See, when we say that a dying person will not lie, we forget to say that some other person can lie. No, the person who is giving evidence, like I said, A is saying that B made a statement that C killed him. Him means B. Now A can lie, no? This your big philosophy, that dying man will not lie, is not applicable to A's sentence, to A's record. So A may be lying like any other witness. His evidence has to be tested. Particularly, you will see in bride burning cases many times, the persons to whom declarations are made are the very near relations of the deceased, who are all grieved, who may be bona fide suspecting the in-laws or husband. But the problem is that they don't separate their inferences and facts. The inferences drawn by them from whatever knowledge they had, even if bona fide, are stated and put forth as matters of fact. Now, drawing inferences is not the function of the witnesses. The court has to draw inference. But here the facts are, the inferences are mixed with the facts and put forth as facts themselves. And there lies the problem. And in such a case, there may be various reasons that the statement of the person who gives evidence regarding dying declaration, that itself may be wrong. The declaration might not have been made at all. It is to bolster the case the witness may lie. Like if in other cases, other witnesses can lie, there is a possibility of this. And therefore, our law requires evidence to be tested. So this is one possibility. But you may ignore an outright lie. But just take the case. You have seen the declarations. I am sure that all of you come across dying declarations often. They are usually recorded by a policeman or by some executive magistrate or doctor. There are various issues about that. We'll see. But see, in what manner they are recorded. I hope everybody understand Marathi, and because the police working is also in Marathi, so I quote what generally I have seen. That the name, full name is given of the lady, age, address. My husband, a full name of that husband sometimes is given, his age, where he works. And now the question that arises is whether a person who is suffering generally from severe injuries, anticipated, will be in a position to make that statement. See, the question that way, I would like to put it in a more straightforward, whether it is edited dying declaration, that one has to see. And in this case, I will tell you an interesting tale, because it's not only that we just go through the judgments or commentaries that you are aware, but see, I want you to think, understand the subject. I don't know whether how many of you are aware, but those who are senior, they may be aware. Once the Bombay High Court had direct, because of these problems surrounding these dying declarations, that we direct that the dying declarations must be recorded by judicial magistrate. And that time I was a principal district judge. It came to me, this order. Being the order of the High Court, it was to be complied with. It was binding. It was made in a judicial proceeding. So, of course, there were problems that would create problems, because one doesn't know that when a call for recording dying declaration will come and how the judge will go and then who will go, etc. So, of course, the district judges made a representation on the administrative side to reconsider that, but it took some time. Ultimately, it was reconsidered and that direction was changed. But in the intervening period of maybe a month, I have forgotten that, of quite some time, maybe a month or two or maybe 1.5 months, the judicial magistrates in the state, whenever required, were attempting to record these dying declarations. When information will be received from hospital or from a doctor or from police that some lady has been, generally why I say ladies, these are mostly used in case of burn injuries sustained by a lady, which is, dowry death, and we call this bride burning cases. In such cases, dying declarations are more common. Now, so our judicial officers used to go, and as I used to keep, there on a number of occasions during that period, some judicial officers, someone or the other, some magistrate would go, judicial magistrate, and try to record that statement. I was just curious about the law because I had my own doubts about the editing of the statement even earlier. So I called a meeting of those judges after some time who had been going to record these dying declarations. And they told me that they had not been able to record even a single dying declaration, because they would be very particular, like they would drive the relatives away. They would drive the police away. Usually, I was told by many that the scene in the hospital will be so many people surrounding the bed. When the person is brought to the hospital, so many questions might have been asked to that person. Everybody is trying to form his own opinion, impressions, asking questions and interpreting the nods or the incomplete sentences and then completing it. So the accuracy of record is the issue. What I mean to say is that the dying declarations, one has to be very careful first, and it is to be argued by you before the court if the court is forgetting that the first issue is always whether the statement was actually made. And unfortunately, even in the discussions of Supreme Court, you don't find much discussion on that. This should take place before the trial court, because the judgments many times proceed on the basis that since it has been reduced to writing and since a record of that has been exhibited, it is to be accepted as, but nobody says that. the judgment doesn't only discuss that. That is because this point is not put forth. And then the question comes about the accuracy of the record. Even if the statement has been made many times, a lady may use certain statements. Hey, Yanni, you know, in Marathi, that is, so it is supplied by that. Now there is a question and answer form. You must be aware that because this criticism of this came, so some standard questions are supplied. But there also we find that there is no application of mind. Routinely all these questions are asked. Like there is a question that you must ask her that did you suspect anybody? तुमचा कोणावर संशय आहे का? आता this question is intended to be asked when she doesn't actually name anybody. But you will routinely find that she says, gives a categorical version that my husband came, he bet me, he poured kerosene, set me on fire. Still the executive magistrate asks, तुमचा कोणावर संशय आहे का? Now this shows non-application of mind. But that apart, I don't say that it should be disbelieved merely because there is a prejudice. That far from that, I would not suggest that. But second thing is the accuracy of the record. And therefore, one has to first see whether the statement was made, and then if it is an oral statement, means it is not reduced to writing. What is reduced to writing is also oral. That is another point I want to make. Some of the decisions, even one decision of the Bombay High Court, unfortunately proceeds on the basis that if the record of an oral dying declaration is made in writing, it is written dying declaration. They have referred to it. Then we had, when I was sitting in division bench, in 2 division benches, we saw this position. But since that view was taken by a bench of 3 judges, and which was not necessary for us to deal with in those cases, we did not touch it. But then we agreed that according to us, at least this was not correct. And if we call it as a written dying declaration, just because it is reduced to writing, then what oral evidence you take notes, it also can be called as written evidence. That is not so. So sometimes you have to clear these notions of the court because the courts have not addressed, the higher courts have not addressed their minds to this question. If they address and then decide, then it will be binding on anybody. But just a casual observation, if it is referred to as written dying declaration, that is not correct. What they are meaning is written record of the dying declaration. Now the accuracy of that record. And sometimes it is oral, means it is nowhere recorded. Like a lady tells her mother only or father only, or the dying man tells his near relatives that so and so stabbed me, so and so set me on fire. Now he gives oral account. So you have to be very careful because the words may be very carefully seen. So what I would like to tell you is, first of all, there is very little discussion or attention to the fact whether the statement really made, and if it was made, what exactly was said. And then secondly, once it is made, again, that it should be subject to scrutiny is also many times forgotten. Now, it is not that it is to be contradicted by some other evidence appearing in the case. A dying declaration, even if it has been made, it can have so many infirmities. And we can discuss just the subjects unending because thousands of cases come across every day. And there may be some infirmities in the dying declaration, which cannot be, of course, generalized totally, but a few categories can be considered. And of course, I said you start from the case of Kushal Rao, which deals with the law extensively. There is no change in the law, though you may find casually the observations different. Some of the judgments of the Supreme Court have been criticized by jurists by saying that they failed to take certain other judgments into consideration. As lawyers or even judges of the subordinate courts, we can't disagree with what the Supreme Court has said. But see, when we say that the law laid down by the Supreme Court is binding, it is not the law laid down by a single judgment. Suppose there is a conflicting judgment, there is a better judgment, a judgment directly dealing with the point and of a greater numerical strength is given before the judgment on which you don't want to rely on, then of course you have to rely on that judgment and point out that if that is not being followed in the later judgment, then you have to urge before the court the earlier judgment has to be followed because that is binding under Article 141 of the Constitution. So let us see what could be the attack on the dying declaration. That why it should not be believed. Like, usually you cross-examine and discredit a person. Here you can't discredit that way. But in that context, I want to draw attention of the participants to section 158 of the Indian Evidence Act. I say so because I have seen that even among judges, there is no awareness of this section. And in one of our judgments, when I was a judge, we had specifically mentioned about this provision. Now, suppose I give you an example. A comes before the court and he gives some narration. He says so and so happened. You are not bound to believe him. You put him question in cross-examination. You try to show, you are entitled to show that he is not a man worthy of credit, that he is a liar. He had on earlier occasion made some inconsistent statement. You know how credit of a witness can be impeached. You know that by showing that he is a liar, he has earlier made inconsistent statements or contradictory statements, different statements earlier occasion, or that he had a strong motive for lying, or that he has been bribed, he is inclined to depose in favor of a particular party, that he has got enmity or ill will against the accused or the complainant, or so many other causes. Now here what happens, you have to make an assessment whether the statement made by a person who died is likely to be reliable, whether it can be believed. And availability of cross-examination, this powerful engine to discovery for the discovery of truth, which is a cross-examination is often described as, that is not available, because you will cross-examine the person before whom the statement was allegedly made, and he will not take guarantee of the truth. He will say, I don't know. This is what he said. I am saying, he said. Matter ends there. So therefore, the lawmakers are very wise. In fact, when the law is made, they consider so many things. And therefore, section 158 has been specifically enacted to deal with such a situation. Section 158 of the Evidence Act, you will find in some of the judgments of the Bombay High Court referred to. I remember this because I was a member of those benches. But I will read the section. It opens with this: what matters may be proved in connection with proved statement relevant under section 32 or 33. For the time being, we are not concerned with 33. So the section reads, when a statement relevant under section 32 is proved, all matters may be proved either in order to contradict or to corroborate, or in order to impeach or confirm the credit of a person by whom it was made, which might have been proved if that person had been called as a witness and had denied upon examination of the truth of the matter suggested. Like, you can, when a witness is deposing, you can ask him whether he was convicted on a previous occasion, because previous conviction is considered as evidence of bad character. Like that, you can say that when on an earlier occasion he had made a different statement. And if he says yes, or you prove that, if he denies, you can prove that statement and contradict him. You know that the procedure of contradicting a witness. You can first ask him that, did you not earlier say this? He agrees, matter ends, because then two inconsistent. If he doesn't agree, the only requirement of law is that you must draw his attention to that part of the statement, which of course, if it is reduced into writing, otherwise you have to say that you have to prove it through some other witness, if it is oral, and ask him that, see, this is what is recorded, now what you have to say. And they will either admit or try to give some explanation, and then the court will ultimately judge. So what is important is, whatever we may say that we are not supposed to say bad about the dead, you are not prevented from saying that the dead man might have lied. This is specifically recognized. Or that man was a liar, or he was inimical towards the accused and therefore may be making a false statement. Incidentally, now, in this context, I will touch a question because we don't want to go deeper. There are a number of cases where it has been observed that false statements have in fact been made by deceased person. These cases, some Punjab cases are that in reported cases, it was revealed because the declarant made a statement, and then the person who is named by him was found to be a very distant place at the time of the occurrence, proving the falsity of the statement. So there are a number of judgments. I don't want to, because that is not the main topic, but it has been observed that sometimes a person may deliberately lie. You say that a person will not meet his maker with a lie in his mouth, but sometimes the person may be actuated by the feeling of revenge. It happens with, there is a family enmity, prior history, prior assaults and killings of one's own family members. And when he is about to die, he realizes, these are the words used by Privy Council in one judgment, that he realizes that this is the last opportunity to take revenge, and then implicates everybody. Means he might have been assaulted by A and B, but in declaration he will mention C and D also, their children or brother, so that they also will be hanged. And this is idea of doing justice, because he is supposed to have been wronged by them over a number of years, over family disputes, land dispute, property disputes. So these are the matters that have to be. So we are not going deeper into that. I know so many cases that I don't know from where to start and where to end. But what I want you to understand is that there is no prohibition from saying that the dying man may not have told the truth. He might have been lying. He may be a person who is not worthy of credit by pointing out contradictory statements made earlier by the statement. So this is, but this is all about deliberate lie, which may not be there in all cases, or it may be in very few cases. But see, what could be the possible infirmities? First is that declarant may not be mentally fit to make the declaration. A person who is burned, is suffering from pain, or who has sustained serious wounds by sharp weapons, or who has suffered a trauma on his head by some blunt injuries. All these conditions might not make him might not allow him to remain mentally fit to make the declaration. He may be under some illusions. He may be not comprehending what is being said by him. And as we said, hardly a dying declaration is ever recorded as if a witness is deposing in court and the judge is patiently recording it. You have to just imagine the scene of the scene in the hospital, where is that usually the dying declarations are recorded in the hospital. The surrounding the relatives crying, the sorrow, grief, utterances of different persons, suggestions from the participants, those who are near. So all these, may be actually recorded in the forms of the statements actually made by the deceased, but they may not, because medically the declarant may not be in a fit position. And therefore we require, to gain assurance, doctor's certificate the prosecution usually takes. Now it's not, one must admit that it is not essential that doctor's statement must be there. And then some judgments have taken the view that doctor must not only certify the fitness to speak, but the mental soundness also. Some judgments have taken a view that if the magistrate, they were dealing with the statements recorded by magistrate, they say if the magistrate is satisfied that the person understood the things, then it is not essential that doctor's certification should be there. All I want you to understand is this. You have to understand the concept of admissibility and reliability. A dying declaration not signed, not certified by a doctor is admissible. Reliability is a question which will depend on the facts of each case, and the reliability of evidence cannot be decided in set formulas. Sometimes a doctor may certify, but still there may be circumstances which will compel the court to disbelieve that version. And sometimes even without doctor certification, the evidence of the person recording, maybe because of stature or because the way he has given, inspire such confidence that the court will accept that the maker was in a fit state of mind. Then the other thing which I said is the accuracy of record. If you can check the accuracy of record, then the value to be attached to a dying declaration will be affected considerably, because you are supplying gaps you are using your own common sense and logic to think what might have happened. Then a third factor is also there, that the declaration may be lacking in circumstantial guarantee. Now, what is circumstantial guarantee? When you see the facts as a whole, one has to see whether the other circumstances support this type of possibility. Now, suppose a dying declaration mentions that so and so killed me, and if it is found that that person is not there at all, it is proved that he was totally away from the scene of offense, several miles away at that very material time, and one doesn't doubt about that piece of evidence of his being away, then what will you call it? This is of course direct conflict. But there may be cases where there is no direct conflict, but may not be any circumstantial guarantee. I will give you an interesting example of a case which I did as a session judge. That happened in a case, there was a dying declaration of the mother. Accused was her own son. The admitted position was that the son and the relations between the son and the deceased were totally strained. The deceased had some other son also, and her property. Hello, it is clear. Everybody is able to hear, no?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We can hear you. Sir, the only thing is that today there is a bit of network problem over here in area. So maybe there may be a little bit of disturbance. That's all.
But there is no problem because I hear some noise, so I thought whether there is problem.
No, sir. We
Anytime
can hear you.
Problem is there.
I think, sir, today there is some problem of network. We can hear you, but there are a few who can't hear you. They have me. So I have been trying to correct that problem.
Yeah, but I will continue then.
Yes,
If
sir.
there is any
I
serious
feel, sir, my request is today, just continue only with dying declarations, because so many people are not able to hear, because we had almost 200 and more people, but out of them 50-60 people are not able to hear.
Okay, I'm very sorry to hear that. But if there is any serious problem, let me know immediately.
Yes,
so
sir,
that,
yes. At least dying declarations, sir, we should complete.
Okay.
Okay.
We'll continue. Now see, in that case, what had happened? The lady had some other son also, and admittedly, she was inclined towards that son. She had some property she had earlier gifted to that other son, not the accused. And there were many instances where she had complained against this particular accused, that he assaulted her, he had abused her, and so many other things. So what had happened, this one day in the morning, while people are just getting up and having their morning tea, that time she caught fire, and then she was in the hospital, etc. Then she made a declaration that my son came in the morning, he poured kerosene on me, and he set me on fire. Now, the council pointed out that this particular room was situated on second or third floor in a chawl in Bombay, a very thickly populated locality also. The son used to stay at a distant place, situated at about 8 to 10 minutes away walking distance. The time was such morning time where the milkmen will come, people would be bringing milk from dairy, and this newspaper, that will be circulated. The boys who distribute newspapers. Then there was a staircase. There was no lift. So many people used to come and go from the staircase. And then there were a number of tenements situated on every floor. And everybody was awake. There was in the veranda of the chawl was movement of people. And so the advocate succeeded in showing that it was unlikely that a person would come without being noticed by anybody, climb 2 stores, set her on fire, and then again go without being noticed by anyone, was quite unlikely. This, together with the fact that there was some instigation from the other brother, because it was a part of record of the evidence in that case, that the room where this lady was staying, this accused used to insist that at least you make this room in my name, because you have given too much to the other, and this lady was refusing. So this dying declaration not believed, and I proceeded to hold that even assuming it was made, it is very unsafe to rely on that, because it lacked any circumstantial guarantee what one would really expect to have happened had he come there and had he gone there. That was missing, so it was unsafe to rely on that. And secondly, I will speak of some other dying declarations which are possible in certain circumstances. Like if the offender runs away, suppose somebody is stabbed and the offender runs away. And sometimes this happens when there is no sufficient light. The person, if he survives, we definitely test his ability to identify the offender. We challenge that he identify the offender, whether there was light, whether he has sufficient opportunity to see that offender. So similarly, in a case of dying declaration also, there may be a possibility that there would be a wrong identification or wrong belief of the declarant. These are, I'm talking about bona fide mistakes which a declarant may also commit. Apart from the fact that a person may be deliberately lying, these are also the possibilities. And therefore, now coming back, when the courts simply say that if it is reliable and true, it should be accepted. A very simple proposition. Everybody knows that. The question which people face is not this, that I should accept a disbelievable dying declaration or whether I should reject a true dying. The problem is whether how to decide whether it is true or reliable. So these are the factors you have to argue, you have to see whether it passes the test, all these tests, and then ultimately, when it is satisfactory assessment was indeed made, it is more or less accurately reproduced, and that what is stated in the statement is true, then a dying declaration becomes true and real, and then it can be accepted. In that case, it will be entitled to great weight, as some judgments say. So these are the few points I wanted to make. Now, questions which come with respect to these dying declarations are, there are sometimes you might have seen that there are multiple dying declarations. You know what I mean by multiple dying declarations. I mean, there are 2 or 3 dying declarations at a time in the same case. Like take a case, a lady is sustaining burn injuries. Now, people come, extinguish the fire. Sometimes the in-laws are there. Sometimes some neighbors are accompanying. Lady is taken to a hospital by some transport, usually rickshaw, taxi. There, people naturally ask her what happened. What she says that the spot burst, I caught fire. Now that is also a dying declaration if she dies. Then if she goes to the hospital, doctor asks what is the history. If it is given by her, that's where a lady is a declaration. Then usually the policeman is there in the hospital, constable on duty. He usually records a statement till the time he sends for the officer or magistrate to record the statement. So all these statements are dying declarations, and your experience will show you that at times they are not uniform at all. Means earlier she says that I accidentally caught fire. Then later on she says, because in many such cases, her parents, her relatives, they come in picture last, because after, we'll conclude in 5 minutes, no?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Hello. Yeah. So I will touch this briefly. So how to see which of the dying declaration is reliable, whether the earlier or different one. Now you have to apply usual parameters for doing this, and these parameters are well settled if these judgments are there on the Bombay High Court. But one important point, since we are running short of time, important point is that all the dying declaration must be considered. You may reject the dying declaration implicating the accused if there are valid reasons, or reject the dying declaration implicating the accused, exonerating the accused. That depends on the facts of each case. That's a matter of appreciation. But one principle is that the prosecution cannot suppress the other dying declaration. And in some judgments, a view has been taken where the prosecution tried to suppress it, that's not allowed. And the plea was taken that the earlier means the other dying declaration is not proved, because naturally, because the prosecution did not like it, they did not examine the matters. That was held that the court may call the witness who recorded that and get it proved if necessary, if that is disputed. But hardly the prosecution can dispute such record which is their own record. This is the decision in this, in case of the appreciation of dying declarations, in case of multiple dying declarations. Now, these questions arise, whether it must be recorded by a magistrate. No, not necessary, I said. Whether a police officer can record. Yes, of course he can record. These are all relating to the value to be added. What is the explanation for not getting recorded by a magistrate? There could be many explanations, because there may not be time to call a magistrate. Now, there are certain other aspects which will require a little detailed discussion. We can maybe do it in some other case, but whether it must necessarily be certified by a doctor, that also I have said that it is always desirable to have it certified, but suppose it is not certified, nothing prevents the court from accepting. And of course, the defense will argue and should endeavor to show that it is totally insufficient, because the state of mind of the declarant may not be all right, and the declarant may not be in a fit state of mind when it was made. So one thing is that Kushal Rao's case, which I stated, must be referred to, and no subsequent decisions have changed the law. The other part of that is, we have seen about the cause of death. Other part is any of the circumstances, the transaction which resulted in his death. Now that is little wider, and since we have no time, I will only make a reference to a case, that very old case, and that deals with this. Some of the procedural provisions were different in that. What amounts to circumstances of the transaction which is resulted into his death has been discussed in this. In that case, what had happened, the deceased had made a statement to his wife that he will go to the station on being called by somebody, and his dead body was later on found in some trunk maybe a month later, so, or at least 10-15 days later. And whether then the issue was whether his statement that he's going to the railway station, after which he was never seen, on being by somebody, etc., would be relevant as a dying declaration, not as a cause of his death, but as to the circumstances of the transaction which resulted in his death. That is a complex issue, but this, I will just note the case, Pakala Narayan Swamy versus Emperor, that is 1939-41, Bombay Reporter, page 428. That's a Privy Council decision. You can find it easily, and it is often referred to. This is a leading case with respect to that clause. So lastly, friends, I believe, as it was indicated, a lot of time has been spent. Maybe section 27 we have no time now to do, because that will be also lengthy, I would say. I am aware that because of some problem of hearing, many of you must be facing some difficulties, and perhaps what might not have been heard by people. That's very unfortunate, but if it is properly recorded, I think there will be ways and means of making it available to you. And I think we had enough of discussion, and so I may stop here and leave it to Mr. Sangram Desai for further conducting this.
Sir, just 2 minutes. Because of this difficulty that we have, technical difficulty that we are facing, actually almost 50 to 60 or maybe more than that, they couldn't hear it. So they have been complaining since long. But since I have just 2 questions, sir, who have they have raised 2 queries.
Yes,
can I ask you those queries, sir?
Yes, surely,
Yes.
surely, yes.
So firstly, sir, there is one question from Nilesh Pandey. His question is, will suicide note qualify as a dying declaration?
Yes, it will qualify if it fulfills the other statement, other conditions of that. That the person must be dead. Of course, if the suicide attempt unsuccessful, obviously it cannot be treated as dying declaration, though it may be admissible under some other provision. Suicide note will be written dying declaration. In fact, verbal or written. Many times, as I said, we refer to the oral statements wrongly as written statement. That is actually not written dying declaration. It is a written record of oral dying declaration. But this
Right.
will be a real written dying declaration. So it will qualify.
Okay. Sir, maybe because of, it's not about time, but it's only because of the connectivity problem that the problem we are facing, that we have to end this program, because otherwise people are waiting. But the problem is that they have been trying to connect and reconnect, but they are not able to hear what you are saying. So I mean, we were waiting for this day.
No, I'm
All
very,
of us that
I'm very sorry. I don't know whether the entire efforts of yours, they have been rendered futile.
no,
I'm
sir.
very
It has been
sorry.
recorded. It has been recorded. It has been recorded. But the only problem is that Section 27 was one subject which any junior lawyer will want to hear from you, because
Yes,
right
sir.
now everybody faces some problems regarding Section 27.
Yes,
So we
no,
were
and now I think it will require equal time for that
equal
subject.
time,
So,
sir. One full session. So I may request
sir.
on behalf of everybody, can you give us one more session? I know you're very busy and you could find time only after almost 15-20 days. You could find some time for us. Will it be possible, sir, for you to spend time on Section 27?
And I would have to, and about 15-20 days means the time you contacted, I was little busy with
Yes, sir.
other occupations about which I told you also.
I know, sir.
There
I
were
know.
some other matters were there with me.
Yes,
But
sir.
now it is that sort of difficulty is not there.
Okay.
Though there are some other matters. So if just a proper date, I will be glad to address these lawyers, because that I like also. I
Yes,
also
sir.
like. It's not that I just do for your sake, and I
Yes.
don't feel that it is something important which I am doing for
Yes.
the administration of justice as a whole. So we'll fix a mutually convenient date,
Yes, sir.
and
Yes, sir.
we can have only on 27. On 27, that will be possible. But it may be
27
after.
you said.
Maybe,
What is the date you said,
after,
sir? 20?
No, I am not suggesting any date at the
Okay, I
moment.
thought
You
you
can
said
ask
date.
me about it.
Okay, sir. Okay, not a problem.
No,
Not a
no.
problem.
No, I said section 27. I said.
Oh, Section 27. Okay. Sir, I thank you on behalf of all the listeners from Ratnagiri, Sindhudurga and Goa, and those who have missed also. I thank you very much. Very soon, sir, I'll contact you and we'll have this session under Section 27 also. And thank you for sparing such time for us, giving time for us. Thank you very much, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you.
Yes. Yes.